In the autumn of 1749, under the dim gold light of a dying sun, a man walked slowly through the corridor of the Viennese sanatorium of St. Elbricht. His hands were trembling not from age, but from the weight of knowledge. But within those stone chambers, among the rusting cages of diseased animals and parchment soaked in bile and ink, he was known as the one who listens to the brain, and that title, whispered in terror and awe, would be carved into the spine of 100 forbidden journals for centuries to come. His name was Johann Albrecht Voss, and in another life he might have been a poet, a monk, or simply a man left alone by the gods. And yet it is recorded in the yellowing archives of the Viennese court. Voss made a request to the emperor himself. He wished to undergo cranial vivisection upon himself. While fully conscious, he believed that within the brain's dying seconds, when its walls collapsed inward like a burning cathedral, it would reveal its final truth. If it failed, if Voss screamed or begged or wept, his name would be erased from the records. It would be unmade. The place where fear ends and something else begins. His obsession began when he was 12, after watching his brother Friedrich die of a fever. Witnesses say he spoke aloud, not to himself, but to a child who wasn't there. Perhaps it was Friedrich. Perhaps it was the part of his mind he had never fully owned. But in his eyes sunken, gleaming with the kind of light only genius or madness can cast, there was peace. As Friedrich's body shuddered on the kitchen floor, his eyes darting madly, Johann swore he could hear something. He submitted a detailed plan. He would take a dose of silver lotus, an ancient sedative that dulled pain but preserved awareness. A team of surgeons, volunteers from the academy, would peel back the layers of his skull, slowly, meticulously, while he described his sensations in real time. The chapel-turned-depoiting theater stank of oil and vinegar and incense. Outside, a thunderstorm crawled across the horizon like some ancient thing coming home. Inside, the scalpel hovered. His words would be transcribed by a scribe, sealed in wax, and stored in the Cathedral of St. Florian. He would die, yes. But his death would become scripture, sound faint and metallic, like a clock unwinding beneath flesh. It was not imagination. It was the beginning. But fate had laced his veins with genius and madness. He was not famous, not yet. In fact, few outside the Imperial Science Circle even knew his name. Voss had devoted his life not to what the brain could do, but to what it could feel, not to its intelligence, but its whispers. He would spend the next 20 years dissecting animals, then human corpses, and eventually, when desperation outpaced decency, the nearly living. It was said that he paid grave robbers in the night for bodies that still twitched. He buried his own dog alive, then dug it up to study what neurons remembered of suffocation. But these were rumors. No court ever found proof, because even the courts feared what he was uncovering. The scandal truly began when he published On the Consciousness of Pain During Sleep, a monograph so revolting that it was banned by the Vatican within 48 hours. In it, Voss proposed a theory that would make even the most hardened scholar wince: that the brain remains awake for several seconds after decapitation, not merely functional, but terrified. He cited accounts of severed heads blinking in panic, of mouths moving in silent screams. And worst of all, he claimed he could prove it. It is here that the story takes a turn most would find too grotesque to believe. They laughed, of course, at first. But Voss was persuasive. The emperor, fascinated by the grotesque, granted permission under one condition: the procedure must be held in secret. And if it succeeded, it would never be publicly acknowledged. Johann accepted. On the night before the procedure, he walked alone through the asylum gardens. He sat beneath the statue of St. Dymphna, patron of the mentally ill, and whispered one phrase over and over again: "I must know what the mind sees the moment it dies." When the surgeons found him the next morning, he was already prepared. Head shaved, skin marked in chalk lines, and Voss smiled. Title: Why This Genius Let Himself Be Dissected Alive, and thanked them for it. October 12th, 1749. At the 4th hour of morning the dissection began. There was no music, no priest, only the rain, tapping like a funeral drum across the chapel roof. 6 men stood in silence around the altar, hands trembling inside worn leather gloves. eyes lowered not in reverence but in dread. He had consumed a mixture of silver lotus, opium resin, and distilled clove alcohol, a sedative devised to preserve lucidity while numbing the flesh. It worked. He did not scream. Though physicians by trade that morning, they were witnesses to something far older than medicine. Johann Albrecht Voss lay still, his head shaved smooth, his body anointed not with oil, but with vinegar and ash. Instead, he opened his eyes and whispered, "When the blade touches, do not stop, no matter what I say." The first incision, a slow, deliberate line across the scalp, revealed not pain, but poetry. Then his lips parted again, and what came out was not science. In the kitchen, before the fever, the fire is lit. His eyes have no whites, only stars. It was memory. The manuscript, still preserved in the forbidden vaults beneath St. Florian Cathedral, bears the following entry. "I can hear the bones humming," he murmured, "like harp strings submerged in salt water. There's something watching just beneath." One of the assistants stepped back, pale as marble. Something is waiting at the bottom. Not because of what was said, but because the air had changed. A sickly, sweet scent filled the chapel like burned beeswax and old blood. Though no artery had yet been severed, the smell was unmistakable. He would later say that as Voss spoke, his own thoughts began to echo, as though he were reading from a text long buried in the spine of mankind. "I see it now. I see the thing that lives in the silence after last breath. It has no name. It eats memory. It ate my brother." That he felt something tapping at the base of his skull, as if Voss's mind had extended outward and was now listening back. Later, it would be identified as the same blend of incense used in funerals for unbaptized children. Dr. Ludwig Heissen, the lead surgeon, gestured to the scribe, a pale man with shaking hands, to begin transcribing Voss's speech. 4:14 a.m. Subject fully conscious. Pulse slow. Speech coherent. Scalp removed. As they sawed through the first layer of cranial bone, Voss grew stiller. Not unconscious, but unnervingly calm. "I see my brother, not in death." Blade clattered to the floor. The second layer, the dura mater, the brain's outermost veil, was peeled back. Still, Voss did not resist. He did not beg. He simply began to murmur. "There are stairs, endless stairs. I cannot walk, and yet I descend. I am falling without falling." At this point, several physicians requested to halt the operation. Dr. Heissen refused. "He is describing the dying mind. You wanted proof? This is your gospel." The scribe's notes became erratic. Ink blots grew larger. His breathing was recorded, not Voss's, hyperventilating. Then Voss began speaking in a different voice. Not louder, not deeper, but older. "The mind is a door. Death is not behind it, but beneath it." The candlelight flickered, though there was no wind. One surgeon fainted, and yet Johann Voss continued, lips cracked, skin pale, brain now fully exposed to air, and smiled. "I am not alone," he whispered. "There are others." Still falling. To be continued in Part 3. The Whisper Beneath the Skull. Title: The Whisper Beneath the Skull. They say the human brain cannot feel pain, but no scripture tells us what it feels when it is exposed. Johann Albrecht Voss lay motionless on the stone table of the desecrated chapel, his skull peeled open like the lid of an ancient reliquary. His brain pulsed, a living cathedral of gray matter, shining faintly in the candlelight, yet he still spoke. Not always in words, sometimes in shudders, sometimes in tongues long dead. At 4:41 a.m., he whispered, "There is a hum, constant, like bees beneath the floor. It's not sound. It's thought, pure thought, not mine." His breathing was slow, as though he was sleeping, but dreaming outward, into the room, into the people watching him. His eyes rolled back, then returned. Focused, unfocused. Dr. Heissen leaned in and asked, against every instinct of decency, "What do you see?" Voss replied. "A chamber made of bone. A woman sits there, skin peeled, mouth full of keys. She says I was not the first." At this, the scribe stopped writing. He was weeping silently, nose bleeding. No one stopped him. The other physicians attempted to proceed with the final phase. Gentle stimulation of the brain's temporal lobe with copper probes. The goal had been to map sensation and speech, but what happened instead was, his spine arched. Voice ragged and too loud for his collapsing lungs shouted, "Impossible." The wax of the candles bled over their holders, hissing against the stone. Dr. Hyson collapsed, eyes wide, pupils dilated. Later, he would claim, the moment the probe touched the tissue, Voss sat upright, with no muscle function remaining below the neck. "It is not inside me. I am inside it." A crucifix fell from the wall. I saw my own mother in the reflection of his brain, and she was eating her own hands. The scribe's final note, written in shaking Latin, reads, "Non est homo, non est deus, est interius." Then silence. Voss's body slumped. The brain stopped pulsing, and yet, addressed in Voss's own handwriting, the mouth moved one last time. No sound, just the shape of a word. Some say it was forgive. Others insist it was again. But there was no time to debate it, because suddenly, every candle in the chapel extinguished at once. They sealed the body within 7 layers of lead and stone. No autopsy, no burial. Only a plaque, "Here lies one who saw too far inward." And the journals, locked beneath St. Florian Cathedral, sealed in wax and scripture. But the most terrifying part, a year later, another letter arrived, stamped with his seal and dated. For days after his death, titled "A Letter from Beyond," 1 year later. Vienna, October 1750. A storm, not unlike the one on the night of Voss's death, swept across the Danube. Lightning cracked the heavens like old parchment, and the city's breath hung frozen beneath the cloaks of priests and soldiers. Inside the Imperial Academy of Science, a courier arrived. His hands pale as if drained of blood. He carried a sealed envelope, yellowed with time, bound in black thread. The wax seal bore a familiar sigil, the Ouroboros swallowing its own brain. But to a place, it was the emblem of Johann Albrecht Voss. The letter was addressed not to any man. Fewer knew it by purpose. It was where the most forbidden medical records of the empire were kept, those concerning experiments bordering on heresy, madness, or something older. A letter written in Voss's handwriting, confirmed by 5 separate scholars, to the chamber beneath the Tower of Memory. That chamber existed. Few knew it by name. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of parchment. The date at the top, October 16th, 1749, 4 days after his recorded death, and the contents. "If this reaches you, then the veil was thinner than I feared. I do not know where I am. I am aware. There are no walls here, only questions wearing the shape of mouths. I saw what you would call God, but it did not recognize me. It had no face, only hunger. Time is no longer linear. I have lived yesterday in the folds of tomorrow, and worst of all, I hear the thoughts of others. Those still alive, I feel the scream of a mother in Saxony as her child drowns. I feel the terror of a man in Rome, waking to find his reflection missing. I do not wish to feel these things. But I open the door, and now the door is open for you, sealed, guarded, forgotten. At the bottom, a final line. Different ink, different pressure. Thank you for letting me see. No one knows how the letter arrived. No postal records, no messenger was ever identified. It now resides, or so they say, inside a lead-lined vault beneath the crypts of St. Florian, alongside the preserved manuscripts of the experiment. But strange reports emerge every few decades. A child in Bavaria born with Voss's birthmark and speaking in Latin. A violinist who collapses mid-performance. Murmuring about a woman with keys in her mouth. A medical student who dreams night after night of stairs made of bone, wakes up with blood leaking from his ears. Some say Voss did not die. Some say he became thought itself, scattered, infinite, watching, listening. Final note, video outro. If you hear whispers in the silence, if your thoughts sometimes feel like they're not yours, perhaps you've stepped too close to the place where Johann went. And if you ever dream of falling without end, don't look down. Because something might be looking back. Subscribe for more stories from the forgotten corners of history. where truth decays into myth, and myths whisper like the dead.